I'm a mother, Minerva Skeith, and it's Minerva. Camarena is Camarena, and last name is Skeith, Skeith.
And for, let's see, what's your role in CTI? Do you have a title with Central Texas Interfaith, or how are you involved?
So I'm one of the clergy leaders with Central Texas Interfaith. My congregation is St. John's Episcopal Church, and we've been partnering with Central Texas Interfaith for the last year.
Cool. Is that the one that's on Breaker and Parkfield?
That's us.
Cool. All right. I live over that way, actually. So.
Oh well, we're reaching out to the community. You know, part of the work that we do with Central Texas Interfaith is because we recognize that what happens in the community impacts our neighbors and impacts us, as you know. So not only the membership of St. John's, but the neighborhood as a whole. And so we love the neighborhood, and we've been there for a long time. And so one of the things we've been doing is that's why we're partnering with Central Texas Interfaith to see what are the things that we could work on to make our communities better.
Great. So let's just kind of talk chapter 313 overall first. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about the program? And again, I know this is a very big picture and pretty open-ended, but just what is it exactly?
Sure. So I believe it was 20. You need to verify the dates, but when it first initiated,
that's okay.
When it was first initiated, it was an idea to be able to encourage new companies to come into Texas, and just like many other incentive programs that exist in our state, this is one of those. And it is this particular incentive program is located in the tax code. And that's why they call it Chapter 313, because it is the Chapter 313 of the Texas tax code. And in that tax code, the way the law was passed, it allowed companies to go to a school district and say to the school district, will you be willing to give us a tax abatement? We won't pay you property taxes. We won't pay you school district property taxes. And in return, what we will do is we will offer these benefits to the community. If you look at the application, the requirements are very minimal. The requirements are 25 jobs for this company to come in. There is not necessarily a salary requirement. If there is, it's a very minimal salary requirement. So if you look at the actual requirements, they're pretty small. But then the company one of the benefits that they do have is that they can give up to $100 per enrolled student to the school district. And because there had been an outcry of tax abatements and that would be given away from school districts, they put in a clause that said, if you give away a tax abatement, the state will reimburse you, school district. So the way they talk about it is you get this money back. It would be backfilled for you, right? So that's how it works out. And so if you look at the programs, and if you look at who's been getting these programs and who's been benefiting from these programs, I believe we've given you the winners and losers, right? If you look at them, the real winners have been over these last, the whole time that this program has been in place, has been corporations, because they've been saving all this money because they haven't had to pay property taxes to the school districts. I think it's important to realize that the school districts really are they collect the property taxes, they give these to the state, and then the state redistributes this, right? So that is why the state is saying to the school districts, we are going to let you not collect these taxes, and then we will backfill these taxes for you. And that's how the program has been working. It was no longer renewed, and because it was coming up to its end of its term, and there were many people, many interests coming out against it. And Central Texas Interfaith, along with the Texas IAF, came out strongly against it, because when we looked at what was happening, it was not benefiting our community. It was not really bringing in the job that they were talking about. And more importantly, Texas IF and Central Texas Interfaith has always said, we are not in favor of tax incentives and tax breaks because it hurts the community. But we recognize that it's a part of what states and cities and local municipalities have been doing. So if you're going to do them, we have fought very hard to make high expectations. Just like any investor, if you're going to invest in something, you're going to want something in return, and you have your high expectations. And so what we've been working with our municipalities and our counties and our state is, if you're going to give something away, what do we as taxpayers and i.e. investors, what do we get in return? And so setting up these higher bars. So when the city was doing these, we asked for a high number of people to be employed, a minimum wage that was more livable wage, making sure that the people who they were going to get hired were local hires, not just people being transported, and there's safety measures and OSHA protections and all these kinds of things, right? But we've always said, do not touch education dollars. That is one should not be taking money from children's education and giving those to corporations. That it's really, we can't justify. There's no justification for that. And what we've discovered is it's just been, it's affirmed everything we've been saying, which is the children are the ones that are losing out. Because every time you have a company who gives money, who doesn't have to put money into the pot, that money then has to be refilled by the state, which means that we as taxpayers are having to fill in that money that rightfully was supposed to be by the corporation. The corporation was the one that would have been, that is their responsibility as part of our community to do their fair share of investing into our children, right? And they have abdicated that. They just don't do that. And so then we have to pick up the slack.
So the emails that we've gotten from CTI, especially over the past year, pretty much across the board against Chapter 313, is that to say that Central Texas Interfaith is against Chapter 313 and the programs that are like it, or Chapter 313 in its current form is an issue?
Chapter 313 takes money away from children's education and gives it to corporation, and that is a non-starter. It's a non-starter.
Okay, and so I'm like I said, I'm still trying to wrap my head around Chapter 313 to begin with. So if the money is backfilled by the state to, let's use the NXP and Austin ISD as an example, right? If the money is backfilled by the state to Austin ISD over the 10-year period of Chapter 313, then I guess, so does that mean, that doesn't mean that Austin ISD students are necessarily losing out, but students elsewhere are losing out from that?
So in Austin, it's a particularly unique case, right?
Okay, all right.
So in Austin, the school district is already has its maximum allotment. So that means that if other companies come in, all those extra property taxes will go to the state's education foundation, right? So Austin ISD does not need to get backfilled because it's already filled up to its maximum allotment currently. But that means that all those dollars that would have gone into the education foundation are not going into the education foundation. That is why the other districts that would have benefited from the education foundation dollars are not going to have those dollars to be distributed.
Okay, got it.
So it's the way part of what can get complicated is the fact that the state collects all these dollars, right? All AISDs have to give what they've collected to the state. The state then all those dollars have to go into the education foundation, which is that's the pot of money that then they redistribute to all the school districts, right? And so that's why I think it's even more important that all these property taxes get collected, because if you don't collect all these property taxes from all over the state, then this foundation the foundation is then has less dollars to be distributed, right? That's it's so if you look at all the applications that have gone in, if you add up how many companies would not have to pay into the education foundation, where is that money going? Where, I mean, we're not going to have anything in that pot, which means then us taxpayers, we are responsible. The Constitution requires an educated money to go be spent for education. It requires that every child gets a fair amount, a fair education, a good education, right? So if there is no money from those corporations who no longer are putting any money in this pot, guess who's going to have to fill that in? You and I and everybody, all the other taxpayers, because we don't get a tax break. I don't get a tax break. And we at Central Texas Interfaith say the leaders are not against us paying taxes. What we are against is corporations not doing their fair share.
Okay, and so in that same vein, does Central Texas Interfaith have an alternative to a program like this? Because this does, also, like it was set out to do, incentivize companies to come in and do economic development within these districts. So is there an alternative?
There is the enterprise fund. There are other programs. Cities and counties have their own programs to do that. And I would encourage you to look at what real economic development has happened because of this. And if you look at the articles that we have been sending, those exposés, you realize that all this hoopla about company X is going to come in and bring all these jobs, and there's going to be all this economic development in your community. And if you look at that, what has happened, nothing has really, they benefited, but there has been no benefits for the community, or very little benefits compared to the amount of money that they have saved and not contributed to our communities. So when you have a company that's already here, like NXP, and they're asking for a tax break, not to bring in a new company, but to expand the company. Well, then why should we taxpayers be the ones who are responsible for their own expansion? NXP had a $6 billion profit. $6 billion of profit. Why should you, I, and every other person in Austin supplement that $6 billion profit? They don't need those dollars, right? And so the argument for tax incentives is, oh, we're going to lure in companies that would have not come in. The research after research after research has demonstrated that companies have already decided where they're going to go. And they make those decisions at the top of what they're looking for in a community. It's not tax abatements. It's, do they have an educated workforce? What's the lifestyle? What's the quality of life? Do they have good educations for the employees? And so that we could then be able to draw on. So here you have Austin, Texas, with the University of Texas, in Houston Tillotson and St. Edwards, ACC, all these, and Concordia University, not to mention even Central Texas, where you add in more, universities. So this is a very attractive area. They're not looking at this area because it gives them tax incentives. They're looking at this area because it's a very, very attractive place to live, right? People want to live here. People move here, right? So they have access to lots of really high quality employees. They have access to quality life. They have access to good educations for their children and for their workforce. Tax incentives is not it, right? So I think that I believe it's like 70% of the companies who move would have moved anyway. So it's not really the determining factor. Again, it doesn't have to be, because they're making a lot of profit already. They've got the resources to move. $6 billion in profits, you don't need tax incentives to expand. You're asking for it because they're willing to give it to you.
That's really the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you wanted to add? Is there anything else that I missed that you think is important to include?
Let's see. I think the thing that I would want you and the community to know is that we have a responsibility to the children of Texas to get a good education. And if you ask people, should we spend money on education? They would say, yes, money should be spent on education. We need a high quality education system in Texas. And then the question is, who pays for that? Who should pay for that? And are we willing to say corporations don't have to pay for the quality education that our children deserve? Only non-corporations, small businesses, companies that don't get these tax breaks, only they're responsible? Or are we going to say every person, every corporation, every company, every small business, everybody, all of us, when we all do our fair share, then we're all really owning up our responsibility to make sure that every child in Texas has a quality education that they deserve.
Okay, perfect. I'm all set.